You are here for a purpose, and nothing about that is random. There is meaning woven into this exact moment you are experiencing right now. At first glance, it might feel ordinary, like just another passing situation in your day, but underneath it, there is a deeper sense that your presence here holds significance. You didn't simply land here by coincidence. The timing of you encountering these words, receiving this message, or feeling drawn into this moment carries a weight that may not be immediately clear. If you were to move past it without noticing, you might overlook something important that this moment is quietly trying to reveal to you. There is a certain energy around this experience that feels deliberate, almost as if life positioned this message in front of you with intention, knowing that at some point you would be ready to understand it. And as this continues to unfold, something subtle begins to change in your perception. What once felt random starts to feel meaningful. What seemed uncertain begins to settle into clarity. Confusion slowly softens, replaced by curiosity, and that curiosity begins to grow into a calm inner understanding. There is also someone connected to your energy in a very strong way. This person thinks about you far more often than you realize. Their thoughts are not rare or fleeting. They are consistent, returning throughout their day, even when they are focused on other things. In the middle of ordinary routines, your presence still finds its way into their mind. During quiet moments, when everything slows down and distractions fade, they often find themselves reflecting on you without even intending to. Their emotions toward you are not simple or one-dimensional. At times, their thoughts feel emotional and deeply personal. At other moments, there is a sense of spiritual pull. And then there are times when physical attraction is undeniable. What they feel cannot be contained in a single label because it exists across multiple layers at once. They are drawn to how you look, yes, but that is only a small part of what holds their attention. What stays with them goes much deeper. They notice your character, your presence, and the way you move through life, the way you speak, the way you respond when things get difficult, and the way you treat others all leave a lasting impression on them. There is something about your natural energy that stands out without effort. Your kindness, your honesty, and the way you carry yourself create an impact they don't easily forget. They see you as authentic, not someone who hides behind layers or pretends to be something else, but someone who feels real in a world where so many people feel guarded or performative. Your sincerity feels refreshing to them. They see you as kind-hearted, genuine, and emotionally honest. None of these qualities feel forced or exaggerated in their eyes. They feel natural, like an honest reflection of who you are. And it is this authenticity that keeps their feelings alive rather than fading with time. There is also something within this connection that they cannot fully explain. From the beginning, there was a quiet sense inside them that meeting you was not just chance. They don't always speak about this feeling, not because it is false, but because they tend to keep their inner world protected. This is someone who feels things deeply. When they care intensely. When they connect fully. But expressing those emotions is where the difficulty begins. Over time, they have learned caution. They have experienced moments in the past where opening up too quickly led to disappointment or misunderstanding. There were times when their honesty wasn't received the way they hoped, and those experiences left lasting emotional impressions. Because of that, they now move more carefully when feelings start to develop. They observe more than they speak. They think before they reveal what is happening inside them. Even so, there is always a part of them that wants to move closer to you, to express what they feel without hesitation. But that desire is often met by another part that remembers what happened before. That part urges protection, caution, and restraint. So they find themselves constantly balancing between wanting closeness and needing emotional safety. This is where the inner conflict lives. Their attraction is real. Their emotional pull toward you is real. Their thoughts about you are real, but everything passes through an internal filter of hesitation before it is ever shown outwardly. They are careful with how much they reveal, not because they don't care, but because they care deeply enough to be cautious. You continue to live in their thoughts more than you realize. Even when they are not trying to think about you, you still appear in their mind naturally. Something about you left a strong impression, something that didn't fade. It stayed with them and became part of how they understand connection itself. They recognize, whether fully consciously or not, that you are different from others they have encountered. You are not just another passing presence in their life. You are someone who created a lasting emotional imprint, someone who continues to stand out in ways they cannot easily define. Because of this, there is a quiet tension within them. Their past still shapes how they approach emotional closeness. There was a time when they were much more open, much quicker to express feelings, much less guarded. They would speak freely, invest deeply, and trust quickly when they felt a connection. But life experiences changed that. Moments of being misunderstood, emotionally exposed, or disappointed taught them to slow down. What once felt natural became something they now approach with awareness. Emotional openness was replaced with emotional pacing. They learned to protect their heart, not because they stopped feeling, but because they started feeling the consequences of feeling too quickly. Now they move with more intention. They no longer trust emotional intensity alone. Instead, they believe real connection needs time, patience, and consistency to feel safe. They believe trust should grow naturally, not be forced. For them, emotions are something that becomes stronger when they are supported by a stable foundation, not rushed or pushed forward. This way of thinking can sometimes make them seem distant or hard to interpret. At times, it may even look like they are holding something back. But the reality is more layered than it appears on the surface. Internally, they are not disconnected or indifferent. They are regulating themselves. They are trying to stay emotionally steady. They are doing their best to avoid repeating old emotional cycles that once caused them confusion or pain. In many ways, they are not protecting themselves from you. They are trying to protect the connection from instability. Still, something within them is shifting. They are not shutting you out, and they are not closing the door on something meaningful. Instead, they are learning and adjusting. Slowly, they are realizing that emotional safety does not require complete withdrawal. They are beginning to understand that there is a difference between being guarded and being emotionally unavailable. And within that understanding, a middle ground starts to form, where honesty and caution can exist at the same time, without conflict. As this awareness grows, their behavior begins to change in subtle but meaningful ways. The shifts are not loud or obvious, but they are real. And often, the smallest actions reveal the deepest internal changes. You may start to notice them reaching out a little more often. Conversations may begin more naturally without hesitation. They might initiate contact in quiet, unexpected ways, simple check-ins, brief messages during their day, or moments where they choose to stay connected instead of stepping back. What once felt brief or reserved may gradually stretch into something more consistent and present. There is nothing forced in this process, nothing rushed. It unfolds in its own rhythm because their feelings are not fading. They are developing slowly and steadily beneath the surface. As trust continues to build, their actions begin to reflect what has already been forming internally. The gap between what they feel and what they express starts to narrow. The emotional barriers that once felt necessary begin to soften, one layer at a time. They begin to understand something important. Avoiding emotional expression does not protect them from pain, it only delays connection. And with that realization, they start to take small but intentional steps forward. Not impulsive, not reckless, but careful steps that still move in the direction of closeness. Gradually, they become more open in how they show interest. Their curiosity becomes more visible. Their attention becomes more consistent. The connection that once lived mostly in thought begins to appear in action through presence, effort, and subtle engagement rather than dramatic expressions. Because beneath their hesitation, one thing has remained unchanged. You still matter to them. You still occupy space in their thoughts. You still bring out emotions they cannot easily dismiss or ignore. Over time, what was once uncertain begins to stabilize. The connection starts to feel more grounded. The confusion slowly turns into clarity. The distance begins to shrink, not through sudden change, but through steady and genuine progression. And as this continues, it becomes clearer that they are not a passive person by nature. Deep down, they are someone who prefers action over stagnation. They like progress. They respond when they feel clear and certain inside themselves. Their pauses are not a lack of interest. They are moments of internal alignment. Before they act outwardly, they need to feel settled inwardly. They want to understand their emotions before expressing them. They want clarity before movement. Because of this, their growth often begins internally long before it becomes visible externally. Eventually, thought turns into action. Feelings that once stayed hidden begin finding expression in real-world behavior. They start becoming more proactive. They reach out more often. They create reasons to stay in touch rather than waiting for chance to do it for them. Communication begins to carry more intention. Conversations become less accidental and more meaningful. There is a growing effort to stay connected, to build shared moments, and to create space for interaction that feels natural and comfortable. What once existed mostly in imagination begins shifting into reality. Small messages turn into longer conversations. Casual exchanges begin to feel more personal. There is a gradual movement from distance toward participation, from observation into involvement. At the heart of this shift is an understanding that connection requires effort from both sides. They begin to recognize that meaningful bonds are not built by one person alone. There must be balance, mutual energy, and shared intention. And with that realization, they begin to move from passive thinking into active engagement. Still, their pace remains steady. Even when emotions grow stronger, they do not rush. Their process is thoughtful. It is careful. It is shaped by reflection and emotional awareness. Progress may not come in sudden bursts, but it continues nonetheless. And that distinction is important. Slow progress is still progress. Quiet growth is still growth. As they continue to reflect and heal from past experiences, the emotional weight they once carried begins to ease. Old fears lose their intensity. Past disappointments no longer hold the same influence. And with that release comes more emotional space, space for presence, openness, and connection. When someone is no longer overwhelmed by their past, they naturally become more available in the present. They begin to engage more fully with what is in front of them rather than what once hurt them. At the core of all of this is a simple truth. People who have been hurt do not stop feeling, they start protecting. Not because they are incapable of love or connection, but because they are learning how to avoid repeating emotional pain. And as they grow, they begin to understand something even more important. Real connection is not built through speed, but through stability, understanding, and time. It doesn't come from guarantees. It comes from awareness, maturity, and the small choices people make every day. It comes from deciding to approach life in a different way than before. That's why real transformation rarely shows up all at once. It tends to unfold slowly, in subtle signals that are easy to overlook at first. More communication, more consistency, more effort, more willingness to engage, more willingness to stay present. These are often the earliest signs that someone is becoming genuinely invested. When a person truly cares, it eventually becomes visible in how they behave. Not in a perfect or constant way, but in a steady pattern that becomes clearer over time. And in this case, their more action-driven side starts to emerge. The connection is no longer something they only think about or feel internally. It begins taking space in their actual life. They make time for it. They create room for it. They begin treating it as something worth nurturing. Instead of only responding when things naturally come up, they start generating those moments themselves. Instead of waiting, they start participating. Instead of staying stuck in hesitation, they begin choosing involvement. As this continues, the dynamic between you starts to feel more structured and grounded. The uncertainty slowly fades. The emotional tone becomes easier to read. There is still patience required, still space needed for things to unfold naturally, but now there is movement. The connection is no longer static. It is developing, it is shifting, it is finding direction. And over time, this becomes one of the clearest indicators of change. Hesitation gets replaced with action, silence with engagement, avoidance with consistency. And those patterns reveal far more than words ever could, because intention is always clearest through behavior, not explanation. Real interest shows through effort. Real connection shows through participation. Real investment shows through consistency. As this process deepens, another shift begins forming beneath the surface, a growing sense of internal balance. It doesn't happen suddenly. It builds quietly through repeated emotional adjustments over time. What once felt tense starts to relax. What once felt unstable begins to settle. What once felt confusing starts to make more sense. Earlier in the connection, there may have been an internal push and pull, moments of closeness followed by moments of withdrawal, interest followed by uncertainty. That back and forth created emotional strain and made things difficult to interpret. But gradually, that internal conflict starts to soften. The emotional responses become more organized. Instead of reacting instantly to every feeling, they begin observing their emotions more carefully. They start understanding themselves with more clarity. They begin separating fear from reality. They begin recognizing which concerns are based on the present and which are echoes of past experiences. As this clarity grows, mental noise begins to quiet down. Overthinking loses some of its intensity. Constant questioning slows. Worst-case scenarios stop dominating their perception. In their place, something steadier begins to form. Awareness, emotional grounding, and a clearer sense of what is actually happening. This shift changes how they see the connection. They are no longer interpreting it entirely through old disappointments. Instead, they start responding to what is real in front of them. And when fear loses influence, something important becomes possible. Authenticity has room to grow. As anxiety decreases, presence increases. As clarity strengthens, healthier choices become easier. Naturally, their behavior begins to shift. They become more willing to stay present instead of pulling away, more comfortable with emotional closeness, more open to staying engaged without immediately questioning everything. The hesitation doesn't disappear completely, but it no longer dominates every reaction. Their ability to remain connected becomes stronger and more stable. This creates space for more natural communication. Conversations feel less forced and more fluid. Their words become clearer, their intentions easier to read, and the emotional confusion that once existed begins to fade. At first, they still express themselves carefully, thoughtfully, with caution, but over time, those expressions become more honest, more direct, and more confident. What was once internal slowly begins to show itself outwardly through actions, conversations, and small but meaningful gestures. On a deeper level, something else begins to happen inside them. Different emotional parts start learning to work together. The part that wants connection, the part that fears vulnerability, the part that hopes, and the part that protects. Rather than pulling in opposite directions, they start finding balance. This creates emotional steadiness. Connection no longer feels like a threat, and protection no longer overrides everything. A middle ground begins to form. From that space, their behavior naturally becomes more consistent, more intentional, more reliable. They follow through more often. They stay present longer. They become less likely to withdraw when things start to feel meaningful. And as this continues, the emotional importance of the connection keeps growing. Even if they cannot fully explain it, they recognize that it matters. It has weight. It has presence in their inner world. Slowly, thoughts about the future begin to appear, not as decisions or promises, but as quiet possibilities. Ideas about trust, stability, emotional safety, and shared growth begin entering their awareness. The connection starts to feel less temporary and more meaningful, like something that could potentially hold long-term value. Still, this growth is not linear. Old emotional patterns don't vanish instantly. Past experiences still leave traces. Protective instincts don't disappear overnight. So even as progress continues, there may still be moments of caution along the way, but now they no longer define the entire direction of the connection.